Rock and roll. All right. Let's make sure he could hear us this time. We lost him a little earlier as I was doing the
Hello.
opening. Judge, were you able to not to hear me as I was giving the opening?
No, I heard nothing. I
Ah,
heard
that's
nothing.
okay.
Sound
Well,
tone. I did get a sound tone.
I gave you a little opening, so that's all right. Well, now we got you on the show, so let me just bump off with the first question here. Now,
Sure.
why and when did you go into law?
Oh my. I think since the age of 5, uh, my relatives and family friends said I had to be a lawyer because I had a big mouth and I liked to argue. So that's got me started, I guess. And I never really looked back. Uh, that's been a long, long time. And I'm still doing it, kind of. Although they say you have many changes of careers as you go along. I guess I'm in a new career, which is talking about my book and how we can make social changes.
Now, so let's tell people how you ended up on this path real quick before we go into the book. So first you ended up as a lawyer, and what was, because I know the story that you were on both sides, so why don't you lay it out before you ended up on the other side, meaning the bench side.
Okay, that's why the title of the book is called From the Trench to the Bench. I started out actually as an entertainment lawyer, believe it or not.
Ooh.
And one point decided I wanted to go into law enforcement, so I joined the district attorney's office here in Los Angeles as a deputy DA. So I was a prosecutor, and then went back into entertainment for a short period of time as a basically business affairs director for one of the studios, Warner Brothers, and went into private practice thereafter, specializing in basically both civil and criminal law with an emphasis on property and casualty cases against insurance companies. I sued insurance companies, lots of them.
Good.
And that's what I did for a long, long time until one day I was very happy going along and had lunch with a friend of mine who was a Superior Court judge, and he was telling me how tough things were. This was 2008, and they didn't have any money to hire additional judges, and they were overwhelmed. So I said, so what do you want me to do? Can I help you in some way? He says, yeah, I can get you an appointment as a temporary judge, and you'll get appointed by the presiding judge, but you got to go to school and take all the courses and get vetted by the other court, whatever. I said, how much time am I going to put into that? He says, no, if you did a day a month, that'd be fine. Well, it started out a day a month. It ended up 2-3 days a week. Some weeks there was 5 days a week. So I've done that since 2008 and was assigned mainly to 4 different areas. So I think I put the most time in. I was assigned to what they call restraining orders, and I did that 5-6 years worth. And I did also small claims court cases, which I liked the best. Then I did unlawful detainers, landlord-tenant, and then I did general civil litigation as a judge, deciding things like law in motion, motions, and trials and things of that nature. And that's what I've been doing. And then I wrote the book.
Now, one thing that me and you share, aside from the fact that we're both JDs, only you're a far more distinguished person, is the fact that we both,
Older.
that too, older, wiser, that we both also went and got a certificate in dispute resolution from the Strauss Institute of Dispute Resolution at Pepperdine.
That's right, I did. They were going to see what they were going to do is they were going to use me as a settlement judge. And they thought, well, it'd be a great idea if you had the experience and the education from a prestigious institute like it was at Pepperdine. So I took the course over there, and I loved it. I thought it was a great course. And got a certificate, just like you say. Because I use those techniques, believe it or not, in court all the time. I take great pride, if anything, in getting cases settled. I settle a lot of cases.
Save people a lot of money, too.
I save them the aggravation is what I save them, because it's only one thing that's certain about litigation. and that is that it's uncertain. And I used to say to clients when they came in, who's your judge? They go, I have no idea. Well, who's your jury going to be? Well, I have no idea. I said, that's the answer to your question about whether you should settle it. Because you don't know what's coming down the pike. We can give you guidelines and we can give you illustrations to see what happened to other people. We could do a lot of those things, but the bottom line really is you have no idea. And when people are uncertain, they become fearful because they don't know what the system is really like. They become fearful. They become anxious. Some of them can't sleep at night. Some of them can't eat anymore. They have issues. And so getting rid of this part of your life makes your life a lot less chaotic. And so I decided to write the book for the public, to talk in layman's terms of how the system works from the inside. Because after all those years of being a trial lawyer, and I tried 99 jury trials to a verdict. So after all those years of doing that, I figured I owed it back to the community. The law business had been good to me, put my kids through school and all of that. And I said, you know what, the public really needs to know how the system works from the inside, instead of just watching, the TV shows where you have a 2-minute closing argument. And that doesn't happen in real life.
That's true.
And so I decided to take the areas that I knew best, which was both the criminal, small claims, restraining orders, general litigation, and unlawful detainers, and put it into what I think is almost like the law for the dummies kind of thing. But it tells you what you need to know if you get arrested at 3 o'clock in the morning, or you got sued by somebody, or you need to sue somebody, or your neighbor is beating up on you and you want to stop them and you need a restraining order because people are threatening you, or whatever it may be. The public needs to know. Now they know in layman's terms. One of the most important questions generally is, do I need a lawyer? And if I do, how do I find one?
Yes.
What should I ask him or her when I'm interviewing them? And I give you the basic ground rules as to what you really need to know and how to go about getting it. No legal advice, because every case is going to be different and people are not my clients. So I give them great guidelines, and all the stories in the book are cases, are real cases that either I handled as a private lawyer or a case that I decided as a judge. And they're great illustrations. Some of them are very entertaining. I love some of those experiences. But it runs the gamut from just about anything you want to know about the legal world, from beginning to end, to convert your life from chaos into order and fulfillment. So there's a spiritual twist to it as well. And I give you some ideas of how you should use spiritual tools, principles of the universe, really, to change your life, and how you can use them. And they work. That's it, pretty much.
Your Honor, this book would have helped me 10 years ago. That's a fact. I have a question here. I'm just going to read the whole thing. This comes from Lars Saturn. What's your opinion of the questionable chatter about the justice system today? Meaning, why is there so much chatter about the Dems getting away with situations the Republicans could not? And do you believe the system is out of control?
Well, that's kind of like a broad question, asking how did the world start and where's it going. But what I can do is tell you I think it's healthy for people to be talking about things that they might be able to change, or at least influence other people in joining them to help make a change. I personally think, and I've interviewed Roger Stone 3 times on my show. I have a radio show called For the People.
Mm-hmm.
Once a week on Mondays at 4 o'clock. It's nationwide. It's on iHeart. I interviewed Roger Stone, and there's always been a debate as to whether or not there's a conspiracy or things of that nature. The fact of the matter is politics is a dirty business, and that both sides are equally responsible for doing whatever they can to the other side without regard to any morality or integrity. It's just the way the system operates. And if we could do anything about it, that'd be wonderful, and we can. But part of that is learning what the issues are and getting an objective viewpoint as to what it really does mean. I was just telling somebody a couple of weeks ago, on vacation, I brought with me the book 1984. I hadn't read it since high school. But when I put it down, I said to myself, we're heading in that direction. That's not a healthy thing. We need to do something about it, and that is to foment debate. And I got into a lot of issues dealing with free speech because in restraining order court, I had to make decisions all the time to balance between free speech or free conduct versus restraining somebody and saying you can't do these things. Each case in its own way had its own constitutional issues on a factual basis. And so I said, well, restraining orders are something that happens in everybody's life, not everybody's life, in many people's lives. People should know more about it. So I think dialogue is a very good thing, a very healthy thing, as long as it's done with a sense of objectivity and honesty.
You just mentioned free speech. This is a question actually just about that, which was coming literally as you were talking about it. So I'm going to read it anyway. Jonathan Hilt asks, why don't judges stick up for free speech? Which you sort of brought that up.
But I do.
Exactly.
But I absolutely do. I'll give you an example. In restraining order cases, we can enjoin people from using speech. There's an old case you're probably familiar with, Neer versus Minnesota, where Justice Holmes said, free speech doesn't give you the right to yell fire in a crowded theater. And so free speech is a very, very significant issue in many, many cases. And I think that some people do speak up for free speech. I take it very seriously. For example, you're probably familiar with Gloria Allred.
Oh, yeah. One of the charmed alums from Loyola.
Oh, she went to Loyola, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The bottom line was that she was being harassed by somebody who was pelting her every day with emails and texts and things like that, and she wanted a restraining order. And I granted it. And by the way, I once asked my clerk what percentage of restraining orders that I granted versus the ones that I didn't grant. She said, you grant about 5%. That's probably true. But getting back to free speech, that doesn't mean you could pelt somebody with emails, for days and days on end. You have to see whether or not that free speech is serving any legitimate purpose. There's a whole body of law on free speech and restraining orders, and that's why I wrote an article on it. And people feel free to read it. It tells you everything you really want to know about restraining orders, restraining order cases. It's on my website. I got a website. I never thought I'd be saying those kinds of things, but I got a website.
Let's spit it out. Why not?
I think it's Judge Herb Dodell.us. I think that's it. I'm not really sure.
Actually, I think you're, as a matter of fact, right. I can confirm that for you because I was on there earlier before the book actually arrived this afternoon.
Oh, well, the article is very illuminating and interesting in the sense that it covers everything from the ability to get a restraining order, how do you get one, what's a temporary restraining order, what kind of hearing is there a trial, is there an appeal, are there lawyers? It pretty much details the law of restraining orders in California. Most of the things that I talk about are either California or New York because that's where I'm licensed. But in most places, the laws are relatively the same with some nuances depending on the location. But I invite people to follow up with it. But to get back to your question, I think we all need to have free speech. I think we all need to be able to make our comments heard because that's how changes get made.
I definitely agree with that statement. Now, let me see here. There was something else that was coming. Okay, Russell Grant. What are your views on the Brenton Tarrant happenings? Does Mr. Tarrant have any hope as an armed, uniformed, open military combatant?
I'm not familiar with the case.
Neither am I. So, Russell, if you could elaborate on that, that would be interesting for us. Okay, now, I guess that would be the only question at the time. Let me ask you this. While you were in the district attorney's office, obviously you tried a lot of homicide cases, and I would think a lot of them ended up as an LWOP. For those people who aren't listening, in legalese, that's short for life without parole. Have you ever dealt with any capital cases that ended up with a death sentence?
First of all, I never tried a capital case. Second of all, I didn't do the actual 187, which are murder cases, although I did what they call preliminary hearings. I did that on a case. The guy that was the insulin killer was shooting up women and killing them with overdoses of insulin. I prosecuted that case.
Oh.
So I haven't had any LWOPs. The other murder cases that I handled, I did as a private counsel. I had two of those. Neither of which resulted in any imposition of a life sentence.
Here is an interesting question. Okay. Is one obligated to shout fire in a theater if there is a fire present?
Oh, that's a takeoff on Near versus Minnesota. In fact, it's interesting that we mentioned that. Of course, you have to do what you need to do to preserve life. We always look at, in fact, one of the criteria in determining whether or not people should be restrained, that means from not only speech, but it means conduct as well, is whether or not it has a legitimate purpose and whether or not the government has, and here are the magic words, two magic words, compelling interest. That's the differentiation that we use to see whether or not something should be restrained or not, whether the government should take any action or not, whether or not the government has a compelling interest. Certainly we have a compelling interest to prevent the use of child pornography. Certainly is a government compelling interest, and that's why that kind of legislation is certainly is acceptable. In fact, it serves a very valuable purpose as a deterrent and otherwise. But generally, you should do whatever you need to do as long as it's the right thing. I use that as a motto for myself. I ask myself the question all the time, is this the right thing?
Now, let me throw in a little twist in this fire question in the theater of our obligation. Now, for a while, people feared about the Good Samaritan laws, that if there was a car accident and they went to render aid and something happened, that they could end up being sued. Can you talk about that? Yeah, absolutely.
Well, most states have passed Good Samaritan laws anyway, which basically says if you qualify, then you cannot be exposed to any personal liability. And that's the right thing. And I guess it's almost parallel to yelling fire in the theater if there really is a fire in the theater. And it's not that far a difference.
Okay, Marley Trotter. Is it true in California illegal aliens are allowed to defecate on public sidewalks simply because they have the rights to do so in their home countries? Isn't that indecent exposure?
Well, I was going to try to think of a great humorous response. But of course, you cannot violate any ordinance, no matter where you come from, and no matter what they do in those kind of countries, if it violates the law here in California or other places as well. So defecating or urinating in public is going to be a crime wherever you are, and no matter where you come from.
This comes from Pirate Radio Podcasts. Please address justice versus the legal system.
Oh, well, that's a tough question, because it's designed to be just. That's why the statute of justice, it looks like she does, with the scales of justice. That's the way it's supposed to be, but it's not in real life. Anybody who thinks that our judicial system is just is living in a world of fantasy. There are so many variables. I'm not saying it's totally corrupt, and I don't want to be perceived as being overly cynical, but what I've seen both from the trench and from the bench tells me that the haves are going to beat the have-nots most of the time. Most of the time. And there are reasons for that. In fact, our Chief Justice of our Supreme Court in California was talking recently that there are many, what they call pro pers, people who are not represented by counsel being represented by themselves. And that's true. I've had it in my courtroom many times. One of the things we're not allowed to do is give legal advice. And the reason for that is relatively clear. If you're giving legal advice to any one of the parties, you're taking sides. So you can't do that. And I'll give you an example of how that really works out. This is a guy that was a well-known, nationally known, famous NBA basketball star. And he bought a house for $7 million. I mean, I remember the details of it really well. And I guess he fell in bad times because over the last number of years, and he was about to be evicted, foreclosed and evicted by the bank. And they were both in front of me, and I was presiding over that case. And I said to this guy, I said, "Don't you have a lawyer?" Because I read his papers. "Don't you have a lawyer?" He says, "No." I said, "You know what? I'm not allowed to give you legal advice, but I'm going to give you some advice. I'm going to give you 2 weeks. Come back in 2 weeks, and I suggest that you find yourself a lawyer. You may have meritorious defenses." And see, I didn't tell him, but I knew that he had potentially valuable meritorious defenses. Might have been able to avoid it, but he didn't know. And 2 weeks later, he came back, still no lawyer. He never raised it. Of course, I couldn't. And given the state of the record, the non-payments and the defaults, I had no choice but to sign a writ of possession, and he lost his house.
Oh, jeez.
And I said to myself, and what made it more interesting is when I was leaving the courthouse that day, he was waiting for me. And he started a conversation. I said, I really can't speak with you because I'm not permitted to have what's called ex-parte communications with one side when the other side is not present.
That's right.
So I really can't talk to you. I said, but I will tell you one thing. You still have time. The decision was made today. I think you should talk to a lawyer.
And appeal it, obviously, at this point, right?
Well, I wasn't saying that in those words.
Exactly.
But I had done that. I had done that previously for another judge who was about to be evicted, and we kept him in the house for 3 years.
There's only one person, and this is just my opinion, that I think would have remained okay if he stayed pro per instead of ended up with the lawyers, was Theodore Kaczynski, because unbeknownst to him, they tried to find him insane, and he threw a fit at that. But that's just that one case. That's the only case that I've ever come across that I thought he was well enough educated, because an IQ of 167, do you know that he's actually the smartest man alive right now?
He's definitely the smartest man in prison.
It's true. He's got an IQ of 167, and Stephen Hawking had an IQ of 168. Now that Hawking's dead, Ted takes the cake. Now, let me get back to some questions here since they've piled up since we had this little quick chat here. What
he
is
can
your...
take the cake, by the way, as long as there's no file in
it. Amen. Amen to that. What is your opinion on the current social climate?
Oh, I think it's moving so fast. In a way, it's good that you get instant gratification and you get instant information that used to take a long time. I remember when I was a kid growing up, if you wanted to make a long-distance phone call, you had to go through an operator, and it was very expensive and all these kinds of things. Technology has taken us to the point where you get instant answers. Somebody would say to you a question that you didn't know the answer, boom, Google it. Stuff like that. I think it serves a very valuable purpose on the one hand, but number two, it does diminish personal conversation. Because when I would talk to my daughter, she'd say, "Dad, text me." I said, "Can't I have a conversation?" "You need to text me. I'll be around, but text me." And so today, even my wife says the same thing. She says, "Just text them." So I guess we've seen some major change, and we've only really scratched the surface. We are moving along so fast that at some point it'll be very difficult to have personal relationships. Everything's going to be on the computer.
Oh, you know what? I can't even go get a haircut and talk to my, barber without looking like the freak in there since everyone's on Facebook. I mean, it blows my mind, but that's how it
Oh,
is
that
today.
I did a show on this actually because the problem, one of the problems with social media is that people can do and say whatever they choose, right or wrong, and you could besmirch someone and ruin a life, a career, basically make an adjustment in their personal life by saying whatever you want to say, whether it's true or not, and you can't do much about it. It's done.
It's true. Here's it.
There are companies that advertise that they can get all that stuff off of the internet. I'm not so sure that's true.
I don't know. I would hope so. I really do because I fear for the children.
I doubt whether it's true.
Now, here's a follow-up to the question about the illegal aliens. What legal protections are afforded to the illegal aliens in the U.S.?
The same legal rights that are available to all of us.
According to the Constitution, yeah.
Doesn't matter whether you're an illegal alien or not, you're here. And you have to adhere to all the laws, both positive and negative. You can get the benefits that are provided for all of us. I don't know of any cases where it says citizens only. I suppose you could say that when it comes to voting. That would be a different, because non-citizens can't vote. But generally speaking, they get the same benefits that we all get, but they also have the same limitations and obligations that are imposed upon us. It means following all the law. It's the same as the answer to the question previously about defecating or urinating in public. It's against the law, no matter where you come from.
Here is a question that's really going to spark some controversy. This is from two different people, by the way. Pirate Radio Podcasts and Third Phase of Moon, Cousins Brothers from Hawaii, one of the world's largest UFO YouTube channels with 750,000 subscribers. What are your thoughts on the Jussie Smollett case and how it was thrown out?
Well, let me provide a slight caveat before we start answering the question. And that is, I don't know all the facts. And when you don't know all the facts, whatever you say is subject to change based on discovery of additional facts. But from a visceral standpoint, just viscerally, I think it was poorly handled by the law enforcement people. We have what's called the DEJ in California. It's called the Deferred Entry of Judgment. It's a criminal concept. And what generally happens is party pleads to a count or more with the understanding that if they correct whatever their conduct was within a period of time, if they do that, then they are allowed to withdraw their plea and they are found and the case is dismissed. We do that in a lot of drug cases, but we do that otherwise. This was a little different from what I understand. He did like 16 hours of community service.
Yeah.
And there was no plea beforehand. And that just kind of walked its way and gone it went. People say that there was political influence in that. It would not be the first time known. It's not the first time in known history that political influence has been used to alter the outcome of any matter, civil or criminal. Happens more frequently than I'd like to think, but it does happen. I think it was badly handled from what I understand. And I think it sends a bad signal, too, personally, because when people literally get away with something like that, they are merely saying to other people, you can do the same thing and you'll get away with it, too. Except those people don't have the same political influence.
That's right. And they will end up in, 25 to life or something like that for a hate crime.
Well, they end up because they're poorly represented. I remember when I was a deputy DA, the public defenders were overwhelmed. They're still overwhelmed.
That's right.
They go into the lockup in the morning to interview the clients. How much time do you think they could spend with each one of those people? Not much. And they get a little information here and there. And if they don't get rid of the cases, they're stuck with more for the next day. And so I don't think that as much as the public defenders do a great job, and most of them do a great job. I think that the average guy doesn't get what he would get or she would get if they were represented by private counsel. I just think that that's unfair. It's unfair, but it is what it is.
Here is something that I'm glad is being brought up because it refers to our mutual friend, Roger, again. What are your thoughts on the DOJ FBI handling of Roger Stone and the Mueller investigation?
Well, I don't do political things, but I will say I had a very enjoyable conversation with Roger several times, 3 times. I think Roger's got a decent defense on the indictment, and I told him so. I think he's got a shot of winning this now, especially that the Mueller report, to the extent we know what's in it, seems to say there was no crime committed. One of the elements of the equivalent of perjury is it has to be material. It can't be just collateral. It's got to be material. And if there was no crime and he didn't tell him the truth about something that's not a crime, it may not be material. And then you have in the question of credibility. Now, I know you interviewed Corsi, but I also heard an interview of him on one of the other stations, on Fox, I think, or someplace. And he was saying that his memory was like mush. Well, you got a witness saying that their memory is like mush, and then you ask them what happened at a particular time, and they remember it. Certainly, it's subject for impeachment. You know, if you don't remember, all of a sudden you remember, doesn't do well on the question of credibility. So I think Roger's got a fighting shot.
I hope so, because after he got that gag order, his voice, you could just hear it in him, and the fact of how much the legal costs have been, and how he's not living in the home he has in Florida, and I don't know what happened to the home in New York, but he's had renting. I know this is literally taking a horrible toll on him, but hey, like you said, I hope he's got that good shot, and I hope he comes out on top of this because I.
Well, look, he played in the big leagues.
Yeah.
And
oh, yeah.
Play in the big leagues, and they pay you the big bucks. There's a price that goes along with that. Roger is not as clean as the white-driven snow. So, in a way, you look at it from a spiritual perspective, maybe he's coming. Some of the things that are coming back at him, maybe.
He is the maker of presidents. 5, really. I mean, 4 if you count.
No, Roger was an important character, and he is a character.
Yeah.
But what I enjoyed about his book, and I did read his book from cover to cover before.
The Stone's Cold Rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had that great book.
And then you look at the last presidential election, and Donald Trump used his playbook to a T. All of Roger's rules were used by Trump then and even now.
Yes.
All the things that Roger said you should do, which he learned from Nixon, who learned from Roy Cohen.
Yes.
Who was the old
the attorney.
Yeah. Yeah, he was the prosecutor in the McCarthy era. And he basically says, this is what you should do and how to do it, and that's exactly what the president's been doing. He's following it to the T.
Now,
maybe somebody should pick up Roger's book, and you'll know exactly why the president's doing what he's doing.
Oh, yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people have, because it is one of those books that it could be used for everything. And one thing I want to add to that he did use that book to the T, and as did Trump, is that also that Jesse Ventura was a huge influence on the 2016 election. After he was elected governor, Trump and Roger went to visit him, and Trump asked the governor how he won. And he said to Trump that it's not about what you say, it's about how you say it. And that's one of the things that he carried over. But not very many people talk about that. Let me get back to the
Jesse Ventura was an interesting character. He was a world-class wrestler.
Yes.
That didn't justify elected governor of Minnesota. But he did. And I understand he was a decent governor. Someone told me that. I didn't know much about it. But they say he did a fairly good job, relatively moderate guy.
Yes, he did. And that's what I heard from people that lived in Minnesota at the time, before I knew him from myself. Now, let's get to Russell Grant's other question here. Do you remember the Brian Atkin gun case in New Jersey? Mr. Atkin or Aitken was locked up when he had transported legal firearms from Colorado to New Jersey back in '09 or so.
I'm not familiar with the case.
Okay. We'll go on to the next one here. This is
Russell's got great questions for somebody who knows the answer.
Yeah. Russell, keep them up.
I don't.
Okay, here's Rolf Leifer Muller, great listener, by the way. He is asking, ask the questions regarding the precepts of the Orthodox Judaic law in congruence with Jordan Maxwell estimation. Jordan Maxwell, I don't know if you know who he is. He's a great guest, but I don't know what's best to describe him. It would literally take an entire show to let you listen to him to kind of know him if you don't.
I don't know who he is, actually. I'm sorry to admit.
That's okay. Let me see what else here we got.
And for me to comment on Orthodox Judaism would be a little out of my league.
Will the homeless that are seriously mentally ill ever be returned to mental facilities to save them from themselves? Too many tent cities, crime, garbage, etc. is only the result.
Well, that's a real societal question, and it really depends on how willing we are as individuals to go out of the way to make lives easier and better for those people. In fact, a very close friend of mine, who I'm going to have on my show, by the way, she's in charge of something called Operation Confidence. This is to provide housing for disabled vets, because when they come back, they end up on the streets, a lot of them homeless, beside those that end up killing themselves.
That's true.
And will we ever get there? I suppose it depends on how liberal the government is or becomes. These are generally things that tend to be more on the agenda of the Democratic side than on the Republican side. But you never know where people are going, where their heads are going to go. Homelessness is a very serious problem, very serious.
What is going to happen to Julian Assange? That's another Russell question.
They're going to bring back the gallows. Ooh. Julian Assange's history, as they say.
It's sad
I don't know all the facts. I shouldn't say that. There's always a presumption of innocence, although sometimes it's pretty hard to ignore the facts when you're thinking about it. I think they're going to extradite him. I think the deal has already been made for that. The deal was made when Ecuador released him and put him out there and made him subjected to being grabbed, which he was. Very predictable. Yeah, I think they're going to extradite him back here. There's going to be a trial, and I think Julian is going to be. He may end up being an LWOP.
Yeah, I hope not. I really hope not. I mean, considering the fact that he's happened to be in the Ecuadorian embassy for 7 years, who looked a little like Howard Hughes when he came out. I feel sorry for the guy.
He should have looked. I was surprised the way the guy looked. I guess they didn't have anybody that could shave him in the Ecuadorian embassy.
Yeah, because he thought they were spying on him.
Oh, I don't know about that. I would certainly question his motivations and why he does and says the things he does and says. You could argue it's free speech. You have the right to disclose, but I'm not sure that right, in fact, I'm not sure, I am sure, doesn't include the right to hack into other people's property and steal their personal information. That's a crime, and I think he's going to pay for that.
Well, here, let me throw a question for you. Do you think, in your personal opinion, that Trump will pardon him?
No.
Okay.
I don't think Trump. I think Trump will pardon Roger if he gets convicted.
Yeah, and I hope Manafort, for that matter, because of,
I'm not so sure he'll go as far with Manafort, because Manafort has all these state crimes for which he was either convicted or pled or would be tried. He can't cover him for those. Roger Stone's, it's strictly a federal indictment, and I read the indictment. I didn't really think much of it, frankly. I thought they were trying to get him to flip, and they figured they'd hold it over his head with 7 counts. But Roger's kind of a stubborn guy. He wasn't going to flip, and I think the president is going to reward him with that if he gets convicted.
I definitely agree, and I know Manafort right now is in federal prison, but the DA in New York promised to charge him in New York in case Trump was to pardon him. So that's the caveat on what's going on with Manafort. But the only reason I suggested is that Trump pardon him is because of Manafort or Black Manafort and Stone. Them going back together so far with the tortures den, the lobby, the tortures lobby.
Well, I think Manafort and Stone are different cases. You know, Manafort was Stone's partner.
That's
You
what I
know
was
that?
saying. Black Manafort and Stone. Yeah, the tortures lobby, the lobbies group that they had in the 80s.
And he also recommended to Trump that Trump hire him as the campaign manager. That came from Roger.
Yes, it did because of the fact that they worked together at the firm, Manafort, Black and Stone. Okay,
Certainly did.
back to question here. This is about, let me find it here. Where was it? Um, is WikiLeaks considered a publication service? Also, would WikiLeaks be technically different than from the New York Times?
Well, that's an esoteric type question. I think I need more facts. But again, viscerally, if all they're doing is reporting the news, then how do you differentiate them from the New York Times? That's all they're doing is disseminating the news too. But I think it depends on what conduct they engage in, whether or not goes past the traditional definition of a news provider and takes him into another realm. I think you also end up with an argument about the same free speech issues. And they still have a right to say whatever they want to say as long as it satisfies a legitimate purpose. The First Amendment is very, very broad.
Could more charges be brought against Assange in addition to the conspiracy to commit communications fraud?
I don't know what facts they would have, but certainly if those facts exist, he could be charged for them. I don't know exactly what they would accuse him of. All I have ever heard was that it dealt with the theft of the data, the hacking of the data. That's all that I've ever heard he's been accused of. I don't know what else he's been doing on his spare time.
That's the only thing that I'm aware of, but you're absolutely right. What is he doing in his spare time that we are not aware about? That will probably come around, over the next couple months, I would think.
Look, there's a deal here too. You know,
It's true.
you think that this is not dealable?
Oh, he's got a lot of lawyers. A lot of lawyers.
It's not that he has lawyers, but he's got a lot of information, and he very well could. I don't know the accuracy of it, but he very well could become a very strong witness to establish elements for a collusion. He could turn and say, it was arranged. Conspiracy means an agreement between or among two or more people to commit an illegal act, and that may very well be enough to find crimes against other people.
Okay.
You don't know. This is a risky situation for them. They got a witness that they probably don't control, and if he's given a life sentence versus 5 years, most people will flip.
True. That's true.
And he may be pissed off because they dragged them back here. You can't tell the dynamics until you know all the elements, as well as the personalities of the various participants. Some of these people made deals right away, got light time, 16 days, 20 days, whatever it is. They made their deals early on. Defendants tend to flip. A lot of times. Lots.
Turn state's evidence. True. Very true.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And do you think it would make a big difference in a trial? Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. Because one of the typical cross-examination is, isn't it true that you made a deal with the government? You're going to go to Palm Springs for 3 months. Isn't that true that you made that kind of deal because you wanted to do something for yourself, and what you're telling us now is not true? It's good cross-examination. Doesn't seem to work most of the time.
Marley Trotter asks, what's wrong with the illegal aliens coming into the country now going into sanctuary cities?
Well, that's way above my pay scale. As far as going into sanctuary cities are concerned, you have to see whether or not the mayors of those sanctuary cities are willing to accept these people, and they're not. They're probably not. And so it's an interesting concept of sending illegal aliens into sanctuary cities, but I'm not so sure it has any practical effect.
On a totally non-related note here, what about marijuana legalization?
Well, I think it's no different than the 18th Amendment to the Constitution, which was the prohibition section.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
disaster.
I've always, well, it was repealed by the 21st Amendment, but I think as a general rule, things that people do for themselves, going back to Griswold versus Connecticut, is their own business as long as they're not hurting anybody. And they lost a revenue source that's been out there for years, and now they're making a ton of money with it. I don't think, unless people are abusing it by driving in conditions they shouldn't be driving in or operating machinery, I think it probably made a lot of sense to legalize it.
What is your opinion on the Patriot Act and FISA system?
Well, the Patriot Act came about as a result of circumstances and conditions at the time. I think technically, I like the idea that you have to have a judge sign a warrant. And under the FISA situation, you have to have a little bit more than you would normally have. The DA generally just goes in and brings in a declaration and asks the judge to sign a warrant. Happens every day, many, many, many times a day. In fact, when I first started as a DA, I was a filing deputy, meaning I interviewed the police officers, and what they told me, if I thought we could win a case beyond a reasonable doubt, we either got an arrest warrant or the people were arrested. Or if we wanted a search warrant, we had enough information to get that search warrant. So I think FISA, on its technical grounds, certainly is a good idea. There are specialized judges that do that, and that's why when I was doing restraining order cases, I would say, because we take the guns away from people when we issue a restraining order. And I've been saying now for a long time that we're neutrals. And if we find that somebody is unstable, that should be made a part of a national database that sellers of guns should have to consult. And if somebody's name is on it, number one, you don't sell the gun, and number two, you report it to law enforcement because it's a violation of a court order. And so I think as long as you've got a judge in the middle, like we have with restraining orders and with the warrants under FISA, then that's an assurance as long as the judges are legitimate. And most of them are. Especially when you get to the higher levels, they tend to be more intellectual, unless it's strictly a political appointment.
True.
But generally, the trial judges, superior court judges, generally, I'm not saying this is an actual rule, don't have the same sharpness as a lot of the appellate judges.
We were caught up on questions, but there's one more here that just popped up. Are we a republic or a democracy, in your opinion?
Well, I don't know how you differentiate the two, really. A republic is just a description. Are we a democracy? Of course we're a democracy. Democracy means the people decide. And what they decide ends up being the republic. We started out as a republic. It's basically, if you look at the Constitution, which I did last week, by the way, I was confronted with a question, and I actually went back and read the Constitution. I hadn't done that in a long time. It's long document.
It is. It is. I actually used to carry one right near me, but I don't seem to find it today.
Well, it says to form a more perfect union. And the union, if you will, I'm not talking about the North and the South, is a republic. That's what this is. So I don't see much of a difference unless you got a specific point. You say that one is applicable to one of them and not applicable to the other. I think they're pretty much synonymous.
We are caught up on the question, Judge. So let's talk about.
I'm curious. Where do you get all these questions?
These are all in the chat, YouTube chat.
Oh, is that right? I'm really not that familiar with the computer stuff.
Oh, yeah. I'll get it to you after so you could see them for yourself.
See how I mishandled some of the questions?
No, people here are digging you.
No, it's very tough. It really is very tough.
Russell Grant wants to come out and have a beer with me and you.
Well, thanks very much. It's got to be a light beer.
No problem.
The fact of the matter is, it's very difficult for lawyers generally to stand in front of an appellate panel and they throw questions at you from nowhere, and you really need to be prepared. Sometimes you're not, because I remember arguing in front of the California Supreme Court, a case that I had, and they were throwing all kinds of questions at me. Fortunately, I was prepared. The other guy wasn't so prepared. Ooh. And it showed. And we won 7-0.
Oh, really?
And it changed California law. It was a significant case, a civil case.
Talk about the case real quick.
It's called Essex versus Five Star Dye House. Essex is ESSEX insurance company. Mm-hmm. And it dealt with the assignability of what's called a bad faith action. If your insurance company messes with you, you have a right to assign that claim against your insurance company to a third party, which is done often. And if that third party then goes after the insurance company, can they recover attorney's fees even though they're not the policyholder? And the answer is yes, they can. And that was a $12,000 case that ended up at $3.5 million.
Wow.
It took 13 years. 2 trials, and 2 trips to the Court of Appeals. But we finally prevailed. We hung in there for all those years, and ultimately prevailed. And the point of the story is that lawyer was asked a specific question. I remember it because it was like a moment in your life, and he just fumbled around and he didn't get it right. I don't know if that was the ultimate determinant in the Supreme Court deciding the way it did, unanimously, but it sure doesn't look good. In fact, when I'm on the bench and I ask questions and the lawyers don't know the answers, it does affect their credibility. It absolutely affects their credibility.
Now,
so the Boy Scouts are right. Be prepared.
Let me see if there's anything. We are, caught up. Now, for those who may have caught on late, let's go back to your book so we can start plugging in again why people need to read it, because a lot of people here already want to read it, and they were asking, which I already answered in the chat, if it was hardcover. I already answered that. I have a softcover version. Is there a hardcover?
You know what? What I'm going to do, hold on 1 second. I'm going to read something to you. I'm going to read the back cover because it answers your question, okay?
Sure.
Other than showing a picture of me, which is...
Well, picture's on you right here on the YouTube stream, so don't worry about that.
Oh, okay. It says, what do you do if you want to sue someone in small claims court? What if you've been sued or served an eviction notice or someone's harassing and threatening you? Are you being barraged with texts and emails? Are you the victim of an automobile accident? Or you've been arrested? When do you need a lawyer? How do you find one now? How do you find the right one? What questions should you ask? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what this book is about. It's what to do if something happens to you and you're not represented and you can't even afford to be represented. Because that's the big problem. Pro pers, as I told the story about the basketball player.
Yes.
That's not the only one, by the way. I had to decide the constitution of a statute, and one of the lawyers had failed to put in properly the language needed in the opposition to this motion. And I looked at it, I said, I can't do anything for this guy. He didn't ask for it. And the lawyer was totally unprepared. I gave him 2 weeks to go back and redo it. He did. He raised it. And I had to decide the constitutionality of that statute. But he needed to raise it. He never did originally. He didn't know the difference. There's a lot of lawyers out there that are not terribly competent, I must tell you. and it's not very good for the public when they get one of these lawyers who doesn't know what they're talking about. And it makes a big difference in the outcome of a case. Big difference. But because most people are unrepresented, I decided that I was going to help those people. I was going to give them information so they understood the system. I was going to give them case illustrations to show that it happened to someone else. It could happen to them. I give them guidelines and procedures, what they could expect. And then I give them a spiritual twist at the end to say you really can change the chaos of your life into order and fulfillment. Just follow the spiritual rules. The main rule is do unto others as you want them to do unto you.
It's true.
Watch your life change. Take your ego out of the equation and do it for the reality. And that's why I settle a lot of cases. A lot of cases.
Now, we've just heard everybody from the Honorable Judge Herb Dodell. And here in California, as a matter of fact, local to me, like literally local, like same area code local, which is pretty cool. We're both in the Valley. Almost, I think you're in Agoura, right? Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, we can go out and have a light beer together.
There you go. There you go. And if Russell can get over here from Utah sometime soon, then we could do that too.
Why not? Why
yeah,
not?
I already posed it to him.
We're all one big community, you know.
That's true. Any final thoughts? And, of course, plug in your website again and anything you'd like to say to everybody before we wrap up.
The show is very diverse and it's designed like the book. And like last week, I had a porn star on as a guest.
Oh.
And we talked about. She was very interesting, intellectual, very bright. I've had Roger many times. I've interviewed Richard Chamberlain, the actor, Lee Baca, the sheriff. I try to cover all kinds of things other than explaining the law, but getting into various issues that are tangential to the law, which are interesting. So I think the show is a great watch for people if they've got the time to do it. It's on every Monday at 4 o'clock on KCAA or iHeartRadio, and you'll learn a lot, hopefully with tongue-in-cheek, too, a little humor. My producer and I are on the show together. He's got a great sense of humor, and he makes the show really interesting. I think people should take a look at it. And I'm reachable, by the way, and I'm responsive. Contact me at askjudgeherb@gmail.com, and the website is judgeherbdodell.us, and you can read the lecture, you can hear the shows, you can go to the YouTubes. We did 75 YouTubes, 3-minute, 4-minute, 5-minute different subject matters, everything from how to collect the debt to what do you do if you're in jail in the middle of the night. It covers everything, and it has an index. So if the particular subject that's interesting to you, just click on that one and just listen to that show. So that's my pitch. I guess I'm a pitchman now.
Well, Sel said that, and you know what? Stay by real quick after so I can have a quick chat with you about those guests because I'd love to talk to you about them real quick. Real quick, folks, like I said, I mentioned the guest who was, I'm fortunate enough that he was able to give out his email on air for you guys and gals, because there are guys and gals in the chat today, to go ahead and ask him questions. And I noticed a lot of interest from you chatters in the book, so I do hope you guys and gals go get it. Now, let me throw some shout-outs of my own. First, I'll give some shout-outs to everybody in the chat here. Let me just go down the list of who we've had so far, if I can at least get them all. Russell Grant, thank you for the question. Same with Marley Trotter. Lars Saturn, always a pleasure to have you on as well. David Lopez, hey, thanks for joining us tonight, too. Sometimes, David, you're first in chat, as a matter of fact. Jonathan Hilt, thank you as well. And Pam Vrettenberg, my social media manager. Check out our website, UnitedTruthSeekers.com. Who else here? Third Phase of Moon, Cousins Brothers from Hawaii, as I mentioned. One of the world's largest UFO YouTube channels. 750,000 subscribers. And Pirate Radio Podcasts, which is Jaffe Ryder from South Korea. That's right. You hear that, Judge? We got a listener from South Korea, a great friend of mine. And I mentioned Marley. Let's see if there's anybody else I forgot. I see. Oh, 1-2 Vegas. Thank you. And Rolf Leifer Muller. Thank you, too, for joining us. And let me see if there's anybody else. I believe
we have at least a dozen people listening.
Yeah, it seems I got these people and all in the chat. Dezombified. Hey, thank you too for hopping in here. Who's another one of my moderators, as he was appointed or nominated by one of my former moderators, Adam Keene, who's still listening here. And who else? Okay, I seem to have gotten everybody. Let me give another shout out to Joshua Cheras, my assistant producer, who is also my assistant in a lot of things behind the scenes. As you know, you can catch all the archives free on YouTube, or you can pay on our website, $4 a month, and you can get them ad free. And also, there's a lot of extra perks if you do go via the website or Patreon, including unheard shows. For instance, there's several interviews I had with the former or the late Edgar Mitchell before he passed away that I never released because of his medical condition. But I would release them to those folks like you who are paying subscribers. But there is plenty of you on YouTube to check it out. With that being said, this was a very special show on a Friday. When I can do an extra one at the end of the week, I do. And if it's possible, tomorrow we're going to try to collaborate with Preston Dennett and Third Phase of Moon. So, folks, stick around. Tomorrow you'll see that if possible, because I didn't know Preston had a book signing. If we can make it in time, we will do it. If not, we'll reschedule that for another time. And remember, as I said, don't forget Tuesday, the Honorable Paul Hellyer, former Defense Minister of Canada, will be returning for his fourth appearance. Great guy, great friend, in his 90s. Literally, I think he's approaching 97 or 98, still strong. And with that being said, folks, this is Dr. J, host of Dr. J Radio Live. Every single social media website is at DRJ Radio Live. With that being said, I have to officially sign off.